reeling them in, dude. We got the hooks in.
I know, dude.
I'm interested to hear what he said. These guys suck. I don't know what they're talking about.
Is that my son?
Somebody's not speaking this heresy.
He commented on our the Christian nationalism episode.
Okay.
He said, good discussion. Bonhoeffer's story is amazing. Definitely looking forward to the movie, which is crazy that there's a movie coming out. Like, what a coincidence, dude.
We can see that weekend too, dude. You guys come down.
Is it coming out that weekend? Or
I think it's coming out. Wait.
Or will it be out by then?
Hold on. I think it might already be out. No, I think it's out next week.
Dang.
Let me see. Bonhoeffer movie. Yeah, the 22nd.
Holy crap.
Yeah, dude, I'm freaking pumped for that.
I mean, I'd be down to see it. Oh, but you're gonna be gone. Frick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang.
Okay, anyways. He said he was intent on trying to wake the church up in Germany to speak up against Hitler and the Nazis. Pastors at that time had become complacent and focused only on evangelism. They were reluctant to speak against the government. Eric Metaxas, I don't know if I'm saying that right, wrote a book a couple of years ago titled Letters to the American Church, in which he discusses the parallels of the church in America today with the church in Germany during Hitler's rise.
Wait, what is this called?
It's called
Letters to the American Church?
Yeah, Letter to the American Church.
Dang.
He said that he argues that it is time for pastors and the church to speak boldly against abortion, Marxism, child mutilation, and all the evils of our day. It's a pretty easy read that I think y'all would enjoy.
Yeah, I'm going to hit that up for sure.
That actually brings up like some pretty big questions though. Because like how involved should the church be in those things? Like, where's the line?
You know, I've been doing some more research, like a lot. I did a pretty good amount today trying to get ready for tonight. And there was just no way I was going to get... I need like legit probably like another week just to go through all the material. But I feel like I did get a good like overview, and I think the hard answer is that there is no line. Like it really is based on the circumstance. Like that's why it's so difficult, is because it's not, people look for this black and white thing of like, oh, well, once they cross this line, then I'll do something.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what got the German church, was that Hitler knew that exact thing. And he played them mercilessly against one another. Like a violin. He played them like a violin, dude. And he kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And he was a master gaslighter. There would be things that would happen that did not even correlate at all to like the Jews, and he would just like use that as a reason to go like murder a few Jews and loot some Jewish businesses, and just like then he would like turn the church against the factions inside the German church he would turn them against each other, and he would like rig the elections, but he would do speeches that cloaked his actual intentions. Yeah. And so that's what made it so difficult for people like Bonhoeffer to get anyone else to speak up, because they didn't feel like they had crossed the line. And dude, Bonhoeffer and one of his friends named Hildebrandt. They formed this thing called the Pastors Emergency League. That was like really the first thing that gained traction in terms of Bonhoeffer pushing back against the Nazis.
Yeah.
And that's eventually what led up to them starting their church, the Confessing Church. And so Hildebrandt was like Bonhoeffer's right-hand man for a while. And they also had another one of their friends who signed the petition, whose name was, I'm going to butcher this, but it's like Niemöller. And he was not as outspoken against the Nazis and against Jewish oppression as these other two guys, Bonhoeffer and his friend, were. Okay. And so this is Hildebrandt writes to him, his friend Niemöller. So Hildebrandt is a Jew, and he writes to Niemöller and he says, I find it impossible to understand how you can joyfully welcome the political move in Geneva. This is when I think Hitler had removed themselves from the Geneva. It's some kind of like international thing they'd been a part of.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly what it was right now, but he says, I find it impossible to understand how you can joyfully welcome the political move in Geneva when you yourselves refuse to adopt an unequivocal attitude toward a church which persistently denies us equality of status, because Hildebrandt was Jewish. And so basically this guy Niemöller was like saying, oh, I don't see a big deal. I don't see why there's a big deal. Like Hitler had done that move, and he had said that it was because this coalition had basically been oppressing Germany. That's how he spun it. But really it was another move towards creating Germany as a superpower. And so get this though, okay? Many years later, after Niemöller had been imprisoned for 8 years in concentration camps as the personal prisoner of Adolf Hitler, he penned these infamous words. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then, they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, but there was no one left to speak for me.
Gosh, dude. I've heard that quote before, but...
they were leaving the League of Nations. That's what Germany had left. But
that's a crazy quote, dude.
Isn't that insane? So, man, there's like so much around this that it's like kind of daunting to even try to come at it.
Yeah, like where do you start?
I don't know. I don't even know. Like it's just gonna be like this mesh of rabbit trails. But basically, okay, Bonhoeffer eventually escapes Germany. Okay, and he makes his way to America.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So he's in America, and he finally realizes that coming to America, he realizes coming to America was a mistake, that he should be fighting for his mother nation, his motherland, his home nation. And
like fighting against Hitler.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
And he makes the decision to go back. And what he says is basically like, how can I sit back and watch this greater evil happen when I can take responsibility, and even if I could bear my own guilt? Because he's wrestling with this idea of pacifism and really not seeing anywhere in the Gospels where Jesus says it's okay to fight back against the government. Right. Yet he sees the Jews specifically as a people in desperate need, of which he has the theological and like church connections basically to help fight the oppression of the Jews.
Yeah.
By fighting
against for them.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
And so he felt like wrestling with the guilt of the gray moral area of doing something like helping to plan another assassination attempt on Hitler was a lesser evil than sitting back in the comfort of America and watching his nation burn. And that is like, is so heavy and so like there's so much that goes on with that. But I will say, of everything that I have read, I admire Bonhoeffer the most for the way that he went about the situation in Germany.
Yeah.
Like for the most part, the book centralizes on like 20 years. His biography. It's like it's the 20s, which was like the 10 years leading up to Hitler in
Yes.
power, pretty much, and then like roughly the 30s into the 40s, which was the lead up of Hitler and the Nazi Party in power to gain like world power, basically. Like this was the 10 years leading up to World War One and World War Two, or sorry, World War Two.
Yeah.
And like throughout that whole time, he's like getting more school, doing his doctorate work, doing his postdoc work, going to America, like he's traveling in all these different places. He's gaining all these perspectives. He's writing, like he's teaching, he's pastoring these different, like he gains so much experience and perspective, and you just kind of can see his writing change. He was always, but that's the thing, like from the get-go with the German movement, the Nazi movement, he was really outspoken, especially for the time. And he made a lot of enemies doing that.
Yeah.
And I can't say I wouldn't do the exact same thing that he did. Like I would love to say that I would try to get my family out, and then I would feel guilty, and I would know that like my responsibility would be to do something about, if I had the ability, it was my responsibility to do something about that. And I would have to wrestle with the morality of the commands of Jesus.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I don't think there's an easy line.
I think at the very least, you can always, I think you can always at least start with your voice.
Yes.
Like you can always at least speak out.
Yes.
Against injustices.
Yes.
Like there's always that option at least.
For sure.
Right? And that's why, freedom of speech is so important, all those things, like being able to voice your opinion. But then it comes to that, then eventually you do have to cross that line of okay, when is violence the answer,
Yeah, and it's like, so I've been reading, there's a book called American Idolatry by this guy named Andrew Whitehead, and he's a social scientist who is also a Christian, and he is more on the left, like liberal side.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting to read his perspective on this, because he grew up like really similar to we did in church and in youth group and in youth camp and all that. And so really, I think he grew up in more of a conservative atmosphere, but was really swayed by more left-leaning
like ideology.
Yeah, ideologies. Yeah. And so his perspective is much more of like a social gospel of like, too many times he believes that like the primary goal of Christianity in America is just to save souls. And then when it really comes to helping people, we often turn a blind eye, which is a solid pushback, I think.
Yeah.
And so
I feel like that aligns a lot with what Dallas Willard says about what does he say? Frick. In the divine conspiracy of like, there's gospel sin management, and then there's like the other track people usually go down is like this social
Jesus, basically.
Yeah.
And so I would say he is like a little bit more on that end, because his whole, it's so interesting, dude. His whole thing is like how he says it in the book, dude. It's really interesting to see because he pushes back so hard against specifically like white Christians and how we are sometimes blind to, like, he uses a lot of language around like privilege and like specifically how like Christianity was very prominent in the South, but so was lynching. And so he's like, how in the world were these slave owners going to church every Sunday and then whipping and beating their slaves and lynching them the next day?
Yeah.
And he was like, that's a prime example of Christian nationalism, where you turn a blind eye to what is clearly another human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of furthers that, and he actually talks about Bonhoeffer in the book. He talks about how Bonhoeffer, his theology was really, or his perspective on not just being an academic, but really putting his faith in practice was, especially to the Jews, was really kind of sparked when he went and visited Harlem when he was in America. And he actually went to several African-American churches. And those were, in fact, his favorite churches to go to, because when he would go on campus...
Wait, this is Bonhoeffer?
Yeah, when he was in America.
Okay.
This is before he went to America the second time, after escaping Germany. This is like really, really early on.
Okay.
And so he was really kind of disgusted by the theology in America and how they were all just talking super loftily, and it was very left-leaning, very progressive. And so then he would go to, he was a big guy. He was a big into arts, and he was big into like music, and he was a great piano player. And so he would go to see Broadway shows and musicals and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And someone invited him to an African-American church in Harlem. And so he would go, and that became his favorite church to go to, because not only were the people so full of the Spirit, but the sermons were like just gospel centered and hugely zoned in on the importance of Jesus, frankly.
Yeah.
And so basically Andrew Whitehead in this book, American Idolatry, makes the claim that, I don't know, I guess he really just mentions it, that there's been studies done on how Hitler and the Nazis actually used the way that America treated black people as secondary citizens as a way to excuse the way that they were treating Jews. And it's just like, I think he has so many valid pushbacks on the way that the blindness that we often have. And he makes a very important point that the gospel is best seen in people that are marginally oppressed in society. Yeah. Not in the population that is on top socially, whatever that means. And so I think what I'm starting to realize is like, there really needs to be a separation between when we discuss what our duties are as a Christian to like my neighbor, and then like what my duties are to my country. And it's just tough, dude. It's just tough.
Well, that is interesting because it seems like you see more and more now where in most church settings, I mean, dude, most church settings, just the subject of politics is like
off limits.
Off limits, dude. Like, you do not, like, pastors are so afraid to stand on like one side or the other.
Yes.
Because they're afraid of being...
They're afraid of losing people.
Yeah, losing people, losing influence, or like canceled. And especially with the rise of mega churches, it's like they kind of have to ride that fence more and more and more and more to hold on to their influence.
Yes.
And you can just see how that becomes
A
a very
problem.
dangerous game where
Yeah.
all of a sudden, kind of like that guy said, the quote you read, where it's like, you don't speak out against anything.
So yes, that's what I was getting to, and I lost my train of thought. Was I think Bonhoeffer based his decision on helping the oppressed, and the oppressed were the Jewish people. It just so happened that in order to do that, the oppressors was the government.
Yeah.
And maybe that's always the case. Maybe that's always the case, that there's going to be a bigger power, bigger authority that's going to oppress others.
I mean, historically,
yeah, right?
Yeah, it's pretty.
But I mean,
common.
like, in this situation, helping the oppressed would like literally means death in Nazi Germany. Like, if you were caught helping Jews, not even like going against Nazis, not even like actively trying to dismantle Nazi Germany. If you're just helping the Jewish people,
yeah,
at some point you were gonna die.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I'm saying I think it's a case-by-case basis. Because when I look back and I see the way that Jesus considered the Roman Empire,
Right.
it's not like he was a patriotic Messiah, right? In the sense that he cared to liberate his people.
Yeah. At least not in a worldly sense.
Exactly.
Right? Because that's what they expected.
Exactly.
It's just so like so tough because you read the story like Bonhoeffer and the Nazis and all that. But then at the same time, like we discussed before, you can go back and read the apostles and like during Nero where they're being legit like executed for no reason.
Yeah.
And there was no uprising, there was no like whatever. So,
but it's like, if we lived in a time, if Jesus lived in, this is what's so hard. If Jesus lived in a time like we do now, what would he do?
Yeah.
That is the tough question.
That's the tough question. Yeah.
Would he just sit back and let these things happen? Like, let freedoms be taken away, let all these things happen? Or would he be speaking out against it in some way? And I wonder, like, because it's very clear that he did that with the Pharisees. He was not afraid to call out their hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So one might call that activism in some sense.
Yeah.
But his goal was not. So the reason they killed him is because they thought that his goal was to gain power.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Gain their religious
the king
power.
Of the Jews.
Exactly.
Right.
King of the Jews. But they didn't understand that he was not trying to create a kingdom in this world.
Right.
And so it's like, I guess that's the question. The question is, if Jesus were here today, what would he do?
That is the question. I wonder if back then, if all of a sudden like Caesar Augustus just decided to start like mass executing the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have a hard time believing that Jesus or God would just let that happen without intervening in some way, right? Because I do believe God, especially at that time, had a plan in place, right? For
Yeah.
like that, and that is in line with, all of Israel's history. Like he
Mm-hmm.
had to go and conquer, like the Israelites had to go and conquer this land um and become a nation or whatever, right? Because that was part of God's plan to bring in the Messiah. But I mean, obviously that's just speculation. I do feel like if Jesus were here today, I think it'd be very similar. Like truthfully, I think it'd be very similar to the Gospels. Like I think he would be very openly against a lot of the things that the church does presently.
Yeah, it's like
I don't think he would be as concerned with the government
I agree.
as like we think he would be.
I agree. I think, and that's what's so tough because I think that Jesus would be like sitting there teaching on like college campus or a street corner or
Yeah.
a church, like somewhere, right? He'd be teaching, and then there would be people like us going up to him and being like, hey, what do we do about this like government corruption? What do we do about our freaking budget, right? Like, what do we do about this and that?
Yeah.
And I think he would just smile lovingly and be like, give to the U.S. government what's the U.S. government's. and then he would like just give this beautiful parable about how the earth's passing away and the heavenly kingdom is coming, but that we can live in the kingdom now with him. And it's just like,
I agree. And the reason why I agree with that is because everything that Jesus did was always upside down.
yes,
Like I feel like in our flesh, what makes sense is to like start an uprising, fight back against this government, like new president takes control, like all these evil elitists are like imprisoned or executed,
yeah,
and like
right.
and we take back America, right?
Yes, yeah,
But Jesus was so like his teachings were so upside down because people didn't understand that like the war he's fighting is different. Like the actual key to win is his way, which is through love and like in peace,
yeah,
and serving people, which is so backwards. And not just serving people, but serving your enemy, which
serving
is crazy.
your enemy.
Which
Okay,
that's crazy.
Dude, this is it right here. It's so this in the book American Idolatry, he talks about how like Christians need to do a better job about standing up against oppressive systems, right? Like that's his whole thing, which is a very like clear conclusion to the social gospel. Like the conclusion of the social gospel is that the greatest enemy, that not against flesh and blood, is the oppressive system. Okay.
Okay, yeah. So today it would be like systemic racism.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
And then on the other side of the road, you have sin management, and we could basically say that like that system of thought leads to the idea that it's that humanist idea of you can do it through your own human power, and God's going to divinely appoint you. Yeah. And I believe that's what leads us to the whole like overthrow the government situation. So why we love Dallas Willard so much is because he does such a beautiful job of just riding a car down the narrow road of Jesus' teaching, which truly was the war of the heart. And the beauty of what Jesus brought was if each person would individually turn to him and allow Jesus to revolutionize their soul, and they would internalize the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, then both avenues would take care of themselves. Like if everyone did that, right? Like the whole point of teaching about contempt and anger and adultery was that the prevailing sentiment of the day was, if you didn't actually commit adultery, if you didn't actually murder, if you didn't actually like say something wrong against your brother,
Yeah.
you were good.
Yeah.
But Jesus knew that if he went a step further back and said, even if you think about lust, even if you have anger in your heart, you've committed those sins. How much of these terrible things that go on like a ripple effect in our society would never even happen, because people would learn to not even be in contempt,
Right.
or would learn to not even ever like lust, right? Obviously not perfection. I'm not saying perfection, but that is the genius of Jesus. But because we live in a fallen world, there's always going to be oppressive systems, and there's always going to be government corruption.
Right.
That's the thing. Is like,
Right.
we think we're going to get to this perfect place where there's no oppressive system, there's no oppressive government, and that perfect place is heaven. Like, that is the place. That's the perfect utopia. And so, like, I think Jesus was so right in teaching that sometimes we're almost wasting our efforts trying to change these two things.
Yeah.
If our alignment with him is off, if our alignment with his ways are not even there, he's like,
Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
And so I think it's really tempting to be either one or the other. Like, you're either like all in for overthrowing the government, or you're like a complete pacifist. You're going to go live in the woods. Like, you're never going to take any part of society. And I think the answer is like somewhere in the middle.
I agree. I think I like what you said about Bonhoeffer and him basing his decision on helping the oppressed. Because at the end of the day, like, that was something that Jesus harped on a lot too, was like taking care of the orphans and widows, like taking care of those in need. Yeah. Because that was at like the center of Jesus' heart. And I think you can still apply that. For instance, in a situation like Germany, like Bonhoeffer's, where the people in need were the Jews. And like, even if, you know, like going and planning an assassination on Hitler or whatever, whether you think that's too far or not, him going and helping the Jews was already standing against the government.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, I feel like that he's going to help the oppressed. Like, that to me seems fine. Like, he's defying the government, but he's helping people who are in need, unjustly in need. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yes, and it's because this is what happens. I think about this stuff and then I get really antsy because I'm like, well, does this mean that I shouldn't speak out on things that I disagree with?
I don't think so.
And I don't think so either.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's what I'm saying is I keep thinking in my head that it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
Of these extremes. And I don't think it is. It's like Jesus very clearly made his opinion known.
Yeah.
Whether people liked it or not. And that came across as anti-system.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it was anti the current religious system. That's how they saw it. He was a threat to their systemic religion.
Right.
And so it's like, because I'm thinking about the letter to the American church, like the idea of that. And because it is frustrating when we've been very frustrated with the church's seemingly like lackadaisical approach to the true or real issues at hand.
Yeah.
And what I'm like fearing is that we're not even supposed to talk about those things at all, which is not
Right.
not the case.
Yes, because
right?
then you'd be making the same mistake that the pastors in Germany did.
Right.
With the quote from that guy, it was like, first they were against the socialists, and they didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And then it was the whoever, they didn't say anything. So it's
Yes.
yes, like definitely speak out at least.
Yes. Yes, and I think, there's another level to that, which is like your patriotic duty as a Christian. And so that gets even more interesting too, because he talks about how he's like, well, a lot of white Christians don't do a good job of loving their neighbor because they don't help immigrants, they don't help those in need, like they're racist at times, or they're this or that, which of course is true sometimes. And it's like, okay, do we have a system of government? Yes, right? Okay, so I think that whole conversation is like another category. I think a lot of times when people talk about this, they make categorical mistakes of like just kind of swimming in and out of the tanks of patriotism and Christianity. And I think that's the sin of Christian nationalism, is idolizing your duty as an American over your duty as a follower of Christ. And so I think like once you have the conversation that like we just had, you kind of have to address of like, okay, well, where do I stand politically? And instead of seeing it as like, where do I stand politically, and then letting that influence who I am as a Christian, it should be, hey, can I help an illegal immigrant as a Christian? Yeah, absolutely. Like that's a human being.
Right.
Can I also stand for the people that have gone through the immigrant system legally and think that all the time and effort and money they spent doing that should be justified by not just letting a ton of illegal immigrants in? I think you could hold both of those at the same hand.
Yes, 100%.
And that's why I think people get it confused.
Yeah.
Is like they tie their political stance to their actions as a Christian. And I don't think that should be in that order.
Right.
Which is not how we think about it though. That's the thing, is that's another area where we are kind of blind as Americans, is we see Christianity through an American lens. Because that's just how we've grown up. And in the same way, Germany saw Christianity through a German lens. And that German lens was, we've been oppressed after World War I. We've been done wrong. And God is raising up Germany again to bring it back to prosperity.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to like turn a blind eye to everything the Nazis are doing right now, because that is my greater goal, is to make Germany great. And that's what got them to the concentration camps. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure.
That's the danger, is putting your patriotism before your Christianity, or putting them in the same box. They're not in the same, they should not be in the same box. But that's how most of us have grown up.
Right.
Is like, yeah.
But yeah, well,
I want to talk to you. Not now, later. No, now.